Hello and welcome to Friday Live. I am your host, Strata lawyer Amanda Farmer. It is Friday. We are heading out live to the Your Strata Property Facebook page. You might be watching us on LinkedIn. You might be catching us on YouTube. Wonderful to be here with you on a Friday afternoon at what is probably for many of us the busiest time of the year. There is no 2025. Nothing happens after Christmas. It all has to be done within the next 7 to 10 days for most of us. I'm here with you. I get it. We're going to get through this. We always do every year. If you have managed to find the time to duck in, say hello here live on a Friday, that is very kind of you. You are more than welcome. If you're catching the replay at another time, over the weekend perhaps, you are also very welcome here. Drop on in, whether you're live or replay, and give me a hello here in the comments. It's good to know who it is in our busy space who has the time to drop into a Friday afternoon Strata chat. That is what it is all about. Here today, our catch up of the week that has been in Strata, taking the temperature of the room. Sean M is here saying good afternoon. Hey, Sean. Hey, Suzanne. Lovely to see you. Lots more eyes coming in. If you want to say hi, you are more than welcome to. Yes, it is Christmas season, holiday season. Perhaps some of our strata managers, contractors in the space, professionals, service providers are having Christmas parties. Today's probably a big day for Christmas parties. If you're an owner, if you're a committee member, what do you do in your community at Christmas time, if anything? How do you celebrate? Do you have an end of year barbecue somewhere on the common property? Do you get together in somebody's apartment to have a drink of something special and to celebrate or commiserate the year? Do you put in for some gifts, perhaps, to those who have served your building well over the last year? Maybe a gift to the cleaners. I know in my building we give a case of beer to the cleaners for all of their hard work. Do be careful giving gifts to your strata manager. I know lots of strata managers that are very cautious of that these days, not accepting gifts and putting themselves in a position where they might have to disclose their receipt of that gift. If you do want to thank your strata manager, perhaps reach out to them and see what the best way to do that might be. I imagine if they're a modern, forward-thinking strata manager or service provider, they might say, hey, give us a glowing review or a testimonial. Jump on Google and give us a really great Google review. 5 stars, please. That's better for us than a bottle of wine or a hamper delivered to the office. Does anyone have Christmas trees or decorations put up around the common property? Do you maybe have some residents who have Christmas lights going at all hours? Is that a concern for you? These are the kinds of things that we strata lawyers, strata managers, I know too, tend to hear a little bit more about at this time of the year. It's great to share ideas as well here on this page. If there's something special that your building does or that buildings you manage, if you're a strata manager, do at this time of the year to mark the season, let us know what that might be. More coming on in. I'm going to totally butcher your name here. Let me know the phonetic pronunciation. Hussein, who is coming in from LinkedIn. It's lovely to see you here. Margaret is here saying lovely to see and hear you. Thank you very much, Margaret. Hey, Sean O, saying hi to everybody. Ready Strata Management is here. How you doing? Saying hi, Amanda. No bottles of Granger accepted here. I don't know that I'd turn down a bottle of Grange, just saying. But yes, tricky environment for our strata managers to be operating in. I know managers, I don't know if you sent this to your clients, that maybe might have been a bit presumptuous to think your clients might be wanting to give you gifts at this time of the year, but I know I've seen a number of strata managers now writing to their contractors that they use regularly, to other service providers, and saying, look, particularly to lawyers. Lawyers are great at giving strata managers gifts, saying to these service providers, please don't drop off the hamper this year. I've heard of some strata managers sending these things back to service providers and just saying, we just want to keep it super clean, super clear, very transparent that we don't accept gifts or other benefits or payments from service providers. Smart move in my book. Hey, Ruth. Ruth is saying, hello, Amanda. My neighbor opposite has lovely lights up, and I do too. Fantastic. I love that. Keep them coming. Let me know what your community might do, if anything special. I know when I was living in my building in Sydney's eastern suburbs a few years ago, we had, and I'm not sure if the residents who are there on site still do this, I really hope so, we had at the end of each year, end of year barbecue. We are lucky enough to have a lovely common property garden where everybody can get together, bring a plate, and have a chat, connect with new residents, connect with new tenants. That was something that had been a tradition for many years. If you don't do something like that and want to get it going, then I encourage you to. It's a really great way to meet your neighbours and to catch up and enjoy that community spirit at this time of year. Hey, David, saying, hi, Amanda. I don't know what those words mean. Sorry, give me a translation. Kristen saying, hi, everyone, settling in for another great Friday Live. Lovely to hear that, Kristen. Good to have you with us. We are going to jump in to a great Friday Live. I'm going to give you a little rundown, summary, revisit, open the wound, perhaps, from our Facebook survey that was running this week about the best things about living in strata. We are going to get to that. I'm also going to draw your attention to a High Court decision that came down just this week. Yes, it involves us. It involves strata and strata owners, strata buildings. Important one for us to be aware of. Not often that our strata communities are featured in High Court decisions, so we're excited about that one. Kristen jumping in saying, we used to have Christmas lunch together, good times. I'm very conscious of the used to there, Kristen. Not so much anymore, perhaps. Can be ups and downs, bit of a roller coaster. I get it. For some communities in strata, some years you might all feel like getting together, having a little celebration. Other years, not so. Better to keep to yourself over certain years. Completely understand that. Podcast episode this week, episode number 433, how to avoid the expense of removing combustible cladding. Cladding is not something that we've talked about for a little while. Years ago, I had a few guests on the podcast, few chats here on live talking about combustible cladding, what it means, why we need to be concerned about it, what the government funding and grant opportunities were out there in a couple of different states where cladding had to be removed, the pain that many buildings were going through, facing, in some cases, multi-million-dollar bills to get combustible cladding removed from their buildings. Not cladding that they decided to install, but was installed by the original builder, developer, designed in by the architect, only to find out down the track that this cladding is dangerous and helps the spread of fire across our building facades. 7 years ago, the Grenfell Tower tragedy occurred and really brought to the fore right across the world the dangers of this combustible or flammable cladding. And even today, there are many buildings out there that still have cladding in place, combustible cladding in place, and are looking into whether or not they need to go to that significant expense of having their cladding removed. My podcast guest this week was Ben Hughes Brown. Incredibly knowledgeable gentleman is Ben. He joined me to explain how some buildings that he's been working with are implementing some pretty cool solutions to help them retain their cladding, even though it might be flammable. They can still retain that cladding and still meet safety and compliance standards. They're keeping their local council happy, they're keeping their insurer happy, and they're saving those costs for owners in not having to get that cladding removed. So not something I had heard before when I came across one of these particular solutions that Ben talks about in the podcast, a cladding monitoring system. I thought, let's get Ben on the podcast to share with us how all of that works. That is what he did this week. If you haven't caught podcast episode number 433, get into that one. I've already seen a few comments coming through over on LinkedIn in particular, saying that was a really interesting chat. Check that one out. More of you coming in live. There's lots of eyes here. Not so many hellos here in the chat. Are you at your Christmas party? Are you in a noisy place having a drink, perhaps having a wind down? If you are tuning in and want to give me a hello, I always love to know that you're there. Kristen saying ups and downs, indeed. It happens. Yes, if you're just coming in, I asked earlier, does anyone in your community get together? Do you have a Christmas barbecue? Do you put any Christmas decorations up? How do you mark the season? Strata managers, do you hear from your buildings a little more often around this time, perhaps about those Christmas parties that people are enjoying? I'd love to hear how people are celebrating the holiday season in strata, because I think it's important that from time to time we recognize that there are a lot of good things about living in strata. Yes, we have our challenges, but for some of us, we've chosen to purchase a strata property, to invest in strata, maybe even to live in strata. And I think it's a good idea sometimes to attempt to revisit those reasons why we might be choosing to live in strata, or if perhaps we feel we don't have a choice. That for whatever reason, availability, affordability, we have purchased a strata property, we're living in strata, then to remind ourselves of all the good things that we have as a result of being in or owning a strata property. So to that end, I posed a question on the Facebook page earlier this week. Some of you, many of you, have seen that question. Many of you have given my answer. I'm going to tell you in a minute what the question was. Sometimes I do this once a month or so, every few weeks. If you've been following the page for a while, you'll recognize this. I throw a question out there. It might be, how many strata meetings have you attended this year? It might be, what is your single biggest challenge in strata right now? I might be planning a free training, and I'll say, hey, if I was going to run a webinar about appearing in the tribunal, what might you want me to cover? And you also generously, so enthusiastically participate in those rather informal social media surveys. Earlier this week, I posted on the page. I asked a question that turned out to be a very controversial question, I'm going to say. I asked you, what's the best thing about living in strata? Innocent enough? Clear enough? Straightforward enough? Right? No, apparently not. We've had, I think, over 110 comments so far, many, many hundreds of interactions on this post and on the comments that have followed. And perhaps bravely, dangerously, I want to get into it. I want to keep talking about this for a little while here today. That question, bizarrely, has really struck a chord with many of you. And when I think about it, I'm actually not surprised at some of the comments that have come through, because not only have some of you graciously, with my thanks, actually answered the question, what you think the best things are about living in strata, many of you have also told me what you think the worst things are about living in strata. Not what I asked, but that's okay. This is a safe place. This is a place where you should feel free to bring your burdens, It's the end of a year, the end of a particularly tough year for some people. So completely understand why not only did I get the best of strata, I also got the worst in those comments. I'm going to take you over. I've pulled a few of them out. Little summary, few conclusions to be drawn. I'm going to take you over to show you some of those. You can also access all of the comments and all of the interaction here further down on this page. That post is still there, and it's there for you if you want to answer that question. What is the best thing about living in strata? Before I share a little bit more with you, I'm heading back to these live comments here. Leonie saying hi. How you doing? Alan is saying hi. Lee is saying hi, Amanda. First ever live attendance with you. Welcome, Lee. If there are any others out there and it's your first time being here live, maybe you've caught a replay before, or it's your first time here on the page. We've got lots of new followers on the page here this week. I don't know if my post asking you what's the best thing about strata living had something to do with that. I know that went far and wide. If it's your first time here, then please do give me a special hello. I'd love to welcome you. Hey, James. James saying, I hope your year is winding up well. I hope yours is too. James. Karina is here. Nice hair. Thank you very much, Karina, for your compliment. And Shauno saying, most people said why they don't like living in strata. That is correct. That is what we got when I asked the question, what is the best thing about living in strata? Here on the page earlier this week, let's have a look at some of the most popular, I'm going to say, some of the most popular comments on this post. Remember, my question was, what's the best thing about living in strata? Tony chimed in. And Tony, if you're here, you haven't yet said hi, please do give me a hello. Tony said you get to live in the inner city at a much more affordable price than in a house. No brainer for me. That's the one I was thinking about. Underground parking, lift access, community gardens, ensuite bathrooms, more spacious than a terrace, and newer finishes. And in my case, a fantastic community and a cooperative, skilled committee. Lots of love on that one from Tony. Tony nailed it, we thought. Ali saying if only they were all like that, would be helpful with repairs. Tony said, Ali, I've owned in 4 strata schemes, New South Wales and ACT. 3 were fantastic. It takes some work. And I'm really grateful to Tony for sharing that dose of reality. Perhaps Tony's obviously an experienced owner, many different properties, sounds like an involved, engaged owner. And he's also pointing out that you see those numbers, 4 strata schemes, 3 were fantastic. Okay, so he hasn't escaped some of the burdens and challenges that many others were sharing in response to this post, and acknowledging that it does take some work. Maybe you might be an experienced strata owner, having bought in other communities, you buy in and there's some change management to happen. There's a bit of focus on compliance, improving governance. If you're the type of person who can roll up their sleeves, wants to roll up their sleeves and assist with that, if you're like Tony, you might. There may be a building that just won't change. And that might have been the 4th of those 4 schemes that Tony's talking about. 3 were fantastic. 1 didn't quite cut it. It's possible that Tony wasn't able to work his magic in that scheme. I'm going to show you some more of these comments. Before I do, quick hellos. Rick saying, good afternoon, Amanda. Ever increasing strata fees is the worst aspect. Thanks, Rick. Suzanne saying it was good 30 years ago, but the last 5 years were terrible. That's interesting. Suzanne, I wonder if that's because of an aging building with more obligations over time, more responsibilities, more money to be spent, or is it perhaps the particular mix of owners or particular service providers? That might be the problem. And Peter's saying, hi, first time visit. Thank you, Peter, for letting me know. You are so welcome. Okay, so that's an example of an answer to the question that I asked. What's the best thing about strata living? Thank you for that, Tony. Sonia was also a person who answered the question. We're a little community of people that look out for one another, help each other out, but also comfortable to close the front door and say, give me my space. We try to have the what would a good owner neighbor do when it comes to decisions, but also none of your business if it's not a strata issue or concern. I just want to stop there because that's so important. And I found myself saying this to, I don't know if it was a member on a member call recently, or it was a client, could have been a strata manager in our CPD training. But this question of how do we regulate this came up. How do we stop this problem from happening? And I was saying, well, let's stop for a second and think, is this an issue that is related to the use and enjoyment of common property? And is it an issue that interferes with occupiers' use and enjoyment of their lots? Because that's the test. If we're going to intervene or recognize a responsibility or identify a responsibility to intervene as a strata committee, as an owners corporation, we need to stop and ask the question, hey, is this any of our business? And I think this particular question was about a person riding a motorbike on the common property without a helmet. And let me know what you think, but that question made me stop and think, is that really something that the owners corporation is able to or even needs to be regulating? Do we need to be concerned about that? We might, as a human being, tap the motorcycle rider on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm not sure that that's safe. And in case you don't know, you might be new to this world. It's illegal when you're on a public road. I don't even know what the law is when you're on private property, but hey, this is private property for people to do whatever dangerous things they might choose to do. But I'm not sure that riding a motorcycle or moving a motorcycle from common property to public property without a helmet is interfering with other occupiers' use and enjoyment of their lots or the common property. So in my view, I think that's an example of a situation where somebody like Sonia and Sonia's community might say, not a strata issue or concern, none of your business. I think we need to be more careful in strata to think about that, because it's just so easy for us to look at bylaws to try and find a way to regulate noise and pets and parking. And in most cases we can, but not in all cases. So I love that reminder from Sonia. We live in a good location with walking access to local amenities, says Sonia. That would cost a lot more if it was a house. I'm in a townhouse complex of 5, split into 3 and 2, and it hasn't been all joy, but a key is having knowledge of the Act, what the bylaws and local laws all mean, and having corporate knowledge on governance and financials, how to apply that so we have sound decision-making and focus on enjoying living in a community together. That is not the first time that kind of attitude came through. Tony's already said, we've seen, it takes work. Sonia's saying we need knowledge. We need to know how we apply that knowledge. We need to have sound decision making. So you can see a bit of a pattern start to emerge here, where we've got strong communities, enjoyable communities that people are happy to live in and can give me an answer to the question, what's the best thing about strata living? These are the communities where we're aware that we need to know some things and need to apply that knowledge. James is here live in the comments saying, best things about living in strata is it's great with resort-like facilities. Lock up and leave when we travel, easy access, drive in, hop into a lift, we're home. Also having someone else responsible for maintenance and upkeep. The thing I don't like are the people who undermine the strata. Fair enough, James. And your comments there are absolutely reflected in what we've seen further in our comments on this earlier post. Suzanne, I see your answer there. Thank you for giving me that further information. James is saying in relation to, I think, is this my motorcycle example? James, we do if we carry liability for a fall on private property. Yes, indeed. If there's something that the owners corporation has done or not done on the common property that causes an injury, that's a problem. I'm not sure that you'd have any liability if the motorcyclist, for example, fell off and injured themselves because they chose not to wear a helmet, or they suffered a more severe injury because they chose not to wear a helmet. Good example. Happy to think on that one again and to keep talking about that one. So we move into some of the more prevalent comments and answers to my question, hey, what's the best thing about living in strata? So many people said, not a lot, nothing, moving out, putting the for sale sign up, getting out of there. Robin was one of those people. Robin said, not a lot, excessive costs and owners taking no responsibility or interest until it affects their pocket. Jojo has come in today and said, get a house, dude. There was a few of those get a house comments, or so why do you live in strata? Why don't you go and get a house? We did reply to one of those comments. Some of you might have seen it, saying, words to the effect, not sure that these days that's all that realistic for most people who are wanting to live close to a main city, close to amenities and services. In New South Wales, within the next 10 years or so, half of the population is going to be living in strata. So the suggestion that those who don't like living in strata or face significant challenges living in strata should choose a freestanding house instead is probably not all that helpful or realistic. I think we do need to acknowledge that we need to provide, there is an obligation to provide, a very pressing obligation to provide safe, to the extent it's possible, affordable, livable accommodation in apartment buildings. That is just the way that it's going. And when I say safe, I mean physically safe for our well-being, for our mental health. I talk about people living in strata improving their peace and their profitability. They're the two things that I have in mind when I think about those who are living in or investing in strata property. We want peace of mind, peaceful life. We want to feel safe, secure, and healthy. And we also want to make sure that we have a good, strong investment. We are absolutely entitled to all of that in strata and shouldn't have to look to a different property type like a freestanding house in order to get it. Answer to my question, what's the best thing about living in strata? Julie says apparently not a lot, according to many of these comments, which wasn't the question. Thank you, Julie. Here's a tip. If you want to be king of the castle, buy a house. There's another comment there about buying a house. A few clever comments in there. I'm going to call out Bill and Ben, who I know tunes in here regularly to live. What's the best thing about living in strata? Bill and Ben says the lack of consequence for non-compliance. That indeed was an answer to my question. Bit of a cheeky one there, Bill and Ben, but I don't mind that. And I'm going to move on very shortly to our next topic for today. But before I do, I couldn't finish up this chat about what's the best thing about living in strata without highlighting John's comment. And this one got lots of love. You can see here from the likes. John says, we hadn't lived in an apartment since our wedding in 1968. And we lived in 3 apartments until we bought our first home. Fast forward nearly 50 years and kids gone, work commitments finished, a home too big for 2. So we bought a new apartment with the idea, tip the milk down the sink, lock the front door and off for a week, 2 weeks, a month. No responsibilities and no lawns, no pool to clean, no bin night. It's been absolutely wonderful. 5-minute walk to 26 cafes and restaurants, same distance to the station, 20-minute walk to Westfield. Sounds like John might live in a similar area to where I've lived in strata. It was heaven until flammable cladding, recalcitrant builder, major 6-year defects to address, and a committee completely ill-equipped to manage a $25 million building. Thank goodness for resources like Your Strata Property and OCN. Hopefully next year we can resume our travels and get to tip the milk down the sink again. Love that post from John. really lovely summary of all of the many wonderful things about living in strata, the kinds of things that I certainly had in mind and had experienced myself and had in mind when I was asking the question. But it's a roller coaster. It can be a roller coaster. There are bad times to be prepared for. There are difficult challenges that we face, and it is fantastic that these days we have such easy access to great resources. And I thank John for mentioning us there as one of those resources. One or two of the comments said something along the lines of, I'm surprised, or are you surprised, or there's a lot of negative comments here. And I replied to a couple of those saying, no, I'm really not surprised. And I've said at the top of this chat, of course, when you build a space, when you build a community that people can come to get answers to difficult questions, people can come to when they're facing challenges in strata, then they are people who have a lot to unload and people who have had a lot of bad experience that they do want to share. As I said, this is a safe place for that to happen within reason. You know that I often remind you of our rules, that we don't name names. We don't want to have the page shut down for defamation or for fear of defamation. So absolutely, everyone is entitled to express their view within the bounds of the law. And I am particularly grateful to those who have expressed views just like John's here about the great things about living in strata. We will need those reminders from time to time. More comments coming in. Michelle, how you doing? Saying, agreed about not having to live in a freestanding house. I live in a freestanding house with land, but I'm 265 kilometers from the CBD. If you want to live right in the city, it's unrealistic to imagine one can have what one can get in regional areas. Yeah, good point. Jeff is listening in from the Philippines. Amanda's podcast is truly international. Great to hear from you, Jeff. Hope you're having a fantastic time. Ready Strata Management saying, not aware of too many freestanding houses that can be had for under $2 million within a 10-minute walk to a world-class city, entertainment, healthcare, shopping, horses for courses. If you have the need for a larger house and deeper pockets, then go for it. Very well said. From my perspective, safety and security comes up for me. It came up from many people in the comments on this post, being able to lock up and leave when you're traveling, having someone around to water your plants and feed your pets if you need them to. A few people mentioned a view. That was a great one. Having a view, if you've lived in an upper level of a multi-story apartment building, had that fantastic view, and then gone to perhaps a house where you have fence around you and not much of an outlook, it makes a major, major difference. You do start to miss that view. Done for you services, the bins, the gardens, the maintenance. Somebody mentioned peace of mind, that if something goes wrong, the owners corporation will fix it for you. That's totally how it's supposed to work. I just want to acknowledge that ain't how it always works. For some people, it is the reason why I have a career. As a strata lawyer, I'm regularly saying most of the work that I do in my practice is helping owners who cannot get their properties properly repaired or maintained by their owners corporation. So it's absolutely supposed to work like that. And that is one of the bonuses. If you think about what you might spend on maintenance, even on insurance in a freestanding home, there's a bit of a discount on that in a strata building that is attending to those issues properly. And somebody posted, being able to come home from work and jump into the swimming pool, knowing that I'm not the one who has to clean it, is a really big plus as well. Lovely comments there. Wendy saying, pluses, location, environment, facilities, timely maintenance with resident owners who are prepared to step up and be champions for the property. Yeah. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, everybody, for your contributions, your answers to that question. What is the best thing about living in strata? That post is still there. If you want to visit it, if you want to let me know your thoughts, yes, your thoughts on what's bad, you can post them there if you like. You are welcome to share, welcome to offload. Okay, we're going to move into some different ground now and talk about this recent case that has been handed down, a decision that's been handed down from our High Court, the High Court of Australia, the highest court in the land. 11th of December, this week, the High Court delivered its decision in Pathburn and the owners of Strata Plan 84674. We do have a link to both the full decision for you, 40-odd page decision from the High Court, quite focused on legislation, so maybe not as easy to read as some of our other strata cases, but helpfully the High Court produces a one-page summary of the judgment. We've got a link to that one for you as well. Rochelle is going to pop those ones into the comments here for you to check it out. This was a 4-3 split decision of the court. That's always interesting to note. It's a situation where an owners corporation for a building in New South Wales, this building is in North Sydney, was claiming damages, or is still claiming damages from the original developer and the builder, damages arising from building defects in the construction of the building. And the proceedings have been going on for a few years. They were actually filed in 2020. It's now 2024. There's been a bit of a stoush in the earlier part of the proceedings, a bit of a question about whether the defendant, the developer, the builder, can rely on a particular provision of our Civil Liability Act to essentially share their responsibility for these building defects with other parties, and therefore, by sharing this responsibility, reduce their liability, and ultimately, if there's a judgment made against them, to reduce the amount that they individually would have to pay to the owners corporation in damages. This is a case that has been run, I think, pretty much from start to now by a firm of strata lawyers called Grace Lawyers, who many of you will be familiar with. This is a particularly sweet, I'm sure, victory for Grace Lawyers, who have been before the High Court previously on a very similar question. Unsuccessful on that occasion because of, since then, the introduction of some new legislation. They have found themselves with the stronger argument this time around in the High Court and have come off with their clients, the winners, with this particular case. I mention them because what I'm going to do is take you over to their summary of the decision. I've been reading the decision itself, a few summaries, a few different web pages about the decision here today. And I think it is both fair and helpful to share Grace Lawyers' summary of the decision in which their client was successful. We have a link for you if you want to go and check this one out directly. I might just try and do my best to make that one a little bit bigger for you on the screen there if I can. So this has been called a landmark ruling in favour of strata schemes in building defects case. The High Court of Australia has found that a builder or developer can no longer rely on a proportionate liability defence in building defects cases. So I've told you that before the case has been run at a final hearing, the defendant, the builder developer, has raised a point saying, we don't think we're wholly responsible. If there's a finding that there is responsibility, we don't think we're wholly responsible for these defects. We're going to want to share our responsibility with some other parties who are involved in this construction. Grace Lawyers says it's a landmark win for consumer rights. A majority, narrow majority, I've told you it was a 4-3 split decision, narrow majority of the High Court has handed down its judgment in this case. And this decision has rebutted any aspirations that might be held by a builder or developer relying on a proportionate liability defence under the Civil Liability Act. when they're responding to a claim for breach of their duty to exercise reasonable care to avoid economic loss caused by defects made against them by an owner's corporation under the Design and Building Practitioners Act. So, Design and Building Practitioners Act will be familiar to many of you. It's a piece of legislation in New South Wales, 2020, and it has introduced a duty of care, or perhaps I'll say enshrined, confirmed in legislation, a duty of care owed by those who are carrying out construction work for owners' corporations, a duty of care that lasts for 10 years from the date that construction work is complete. Design and Building Practitioners Act only applies to certain types of building work. I'm not going to get into that too much today, save to confirm that if it's the construction of a brand new building, then Design and Building Practitioners Act and these requirements, this duty of care, are going to apply. And this duty of care is in place for 10 years from the completion of the building. This legislation, when it came in, was expressly retrospective. The building involved in this case, North Sydney building, was actually finished in 2010. So by now it's an older building, getting on in years. But within 5 days of the expiry of their 10-year period, this building managed to get their claim lodged in the Supreme Court, relying on this Section 37 of the Design and Building Practitioners Act, saying, hey, this developer owed us a duty of care. There are building defects. Those building defects have caused us to suffer loss. We're losing money. We've lost money. We've had to pay for the building defects to be rectified. I don't know the amount of the claim. Some out there who might be more closely involved in me may know if there's a multi-million dollar claim. I expect it might be, to be spending this much money on legal fees. We want the builder developer to pay us our losses because they have breached this duty. So Grace Lawyers tells us that the builder developer sought to reduce their commercial exposures by seeking to attribute proportionate blame on 9 other parties who were involved in the scheme's design and construction. And when you look at the case, you'll see that they tried to apportion blame to subcontractors, waterproofing subcontractors, to the manufacturer of cladding, to the architect, to the principal certifying authority, so the private certifier, also to the local council as the consent authority. So saying, look, it's not entirely our fault that these defects occurred. There were a lot of other people involved here, and we want them to share some of the blame. They said that they were allowed, the defendant, the builder developer, said that they were allowed to share the blame, and that was part of their defense. And the Owners Corporation was arguing that, no, you can't do that. Design and Building Practitioners Act does not allow you to do that. You can't rely on the Civil Liability Act, where you might otherwise be able to apportion blame in other claims. Design and Building Practitioners Act doesn't allow you to do that. So this primary stoush about whether or not this defense was available is what was ventilated through the Supreme Court in 2023, then to the Court of Appeal, then finally to the High Court. Philip's just posting, if, say, the builder had declared bankruptcy, would the Home Building Compensation Fund cover the damage? Philip, there will not be Home Building Compensation Fund insurance for a building like this because it's 4 stories or more, is my understanding. So for our multi-story apartment buildings, there is no Home Building Compensation Fund insurance in New South Wales. That may be a surprise to you, that may be a shock to you, but it is why it is so important that we have these protections in our legislation for owners corporations, because insurance will not always be there to respond. And indeed, having in place now the decennial liability insurance, which is the 10-year insurance that some developers can tap into to be able to give owners corporations that greater protection as well. But there certainly is and I plan to come to that. You've got in early there, Philip. Plan to come to that at the end. There certainly is the question here of, even with all of this litigation, at the end of this litigation, will this builder developer still be solvent, still be around to be able to meet this claim, which with all of these cost orders, I imagine is now a significant claim for this owner's corporation. Significant is the word. Grace Lawyers, in their article here, is telling us Pathburn is significant because it closes down what was until now believed to be one of the largest defensive weapons in the defendant's arsenal when dealing with a claim under the DBPA, this proportionate liability scheme. If the High Court hadn't made this decision, this scheme would be allowing a builder or developer to claim that anyone else involved in the construction was to an extent responsible for the damage and therefore attribute an amount to that party or to more than one party. Essentially, the defendant would be naming concurrent wrongdoers and seeking orders from the court that the amount of damages be reduced and instead be payable by those other concurrent wrongdoers, depending on their degree of culpability. So the defendant's essentially saying, if the court says I'm at fault, then I reduce my degree of culpability by introducing that it is also the fault of these others to certain extents. This would mean that an owner's corporation would sue the builder and developer responsible for construction only for that person to defend the proceedings by seeking an apportionment against others. Thereafter, it would be for the owner's corporation to determine which, if any, of those others they would seek to join to the proceedings. They would bear, the owner's corporation would bear the cost, the time, the effort, and the risk of running claims against all of those parties. So an example here in the article, if the owner's corporation brings a claim for $1 million against a builder in damages arising from defective waterproofing, the builder might name the waterproofer who did the work, the principal certifying authority who issued the occupation certificate for the defective work, the engineer who prepared the hydraulic blueprint for the building. And that could lead to a situation where the court accepts all four parties are responsible to some extent and apportions, shares the damages amongst them accordingly. That's really tricky for owners corporations who are suing, where they have building defects like this. Some of those parties might be insolvent. Philip's already asked that question about insurance, where there might be insolvency. This is common in modern developments. We're told that companies are set up as special purpose vehicles for the duration of development, and then they're put into liquidation afterwards. There's also the fact that the plaintiff, the owner's corporation making the claim, bears the risk of not joining a party to a claim once they've been nominated as someone who possibly contributed to the loss. If the court then finds that a non-party is liable, the plaintiff doesn't get any money for that particular part of the claim unless that party has been joined. So there's a real obligation there, burden, a risk for the owner's corporation when they're dealing with one of these defenses to join everybody and anybody to the claim. And this is tough for owners corporations who weren't around, didn't exist. The owner's corporation was not a thing when this building contract was entered into. The strata plan hadn't been registered. The owners hadn't purchased their lots. Nobody had moved in. This was not a legal entity at the time the work was done. So who are they to know who was involved or to what degree those other parties might be responsible for the defects? So there was a real unfairness there in this approach for owners corporations. The example of the owner's corporation with the defective waterproofing, if the owner's corporation does get that $1 million in damages against the waterproofer who might be found 100% liable, the builder, certifier, and engineer would be found not to be liable to any extent. And there may be claims against others that are out of time. So even if the owner's corporation does want to claim against them, it may have lost its opportunity to do so. So what this High Court decision does is remove all of those burdens and concerns from our owners corporations. An owners corporation can commence a claim against a builder for breach of the duty of care provision in the Design and Building Practitioners Act, make that developer builder personally liable for the whole of the financial, the economic loss that's caused by their breach. Builder developer can't raise that proportionate liability, that sharing defense, or excuse, and the owners corporation doesn't have to make all of those hard decisions about whether to join anybody else. That burden is instead going to be on the builder and a developer to make their own cross claims against those other people who they're alleging breached their duties. The builder developer goes to the time, trouble, and expense and takes the risk of running those claims. So, good result for owners generally, for owners in buildings that are within that 10-year period of the completion of construction work that falls under the Design and Building Practitioners Act. It remains to be seen, as I understand it, how this case will ultimately play out, what the final result might be for this building in North Sydney. It may be now that the claim can be resolved. Maybe it can be settled now that the High Court has given its opinion on this attempt to share liability. What we do know when we see a case run through the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, and the High Court is that the legal fees must be astronomical. And we do know, and Grace Lawyers has identified this in their article, that some developers, building companies, contractors do set up special purpose vehicles when they are doing construction work like this. And when the time comes to meet a claim, to be answerable for building defects, to pay damages, that company no longer exists, is not solvent, has been wound up. I sincerely hope that is not going to be the result for the owners in this situation. And there is not, as far as I'm aware. There wouldn't have been any decennial liability insurance. That's a new requirement that's only come in very recently. There wouldn't have been, as I understand it, any home building compensation fund insurance. So if this builder developer does disappear, it may be that the owners are left holding the can. Heroes that they are for agreeing to go through this legal process and get this case to the level of the High Court and get some certainty for themselves and for others who will be coming after them. Indeed, the point that was made here is that this was the main purpose of this section of the Design and Building Practitioners Act, to be introducing this duty of care, to be making builders and developers responsible, because to date they simply haven't been. They've been able to get out of their duties, out of their responsibilities. We've needed this legislation to be able to solve this problem. And part of the work that the Court of Appeal did in making its decision, which was upheld by the High Court, was to go and have a look at the second reading speeches to Parliament when this legislation was made, having a look at the reasons why it was made. It was made to specifically protect owners corporations and community associations, to recognize that the ones who are suffering the loss are not the ones who are parties to the contract, are not the ones who were around when the work was being done. That is the reason why there should be one single central responsible party. And that single central responsible party, at least in this case, has been said to be the builder, the developer, who were in charge of, had control of the work that was being done. And it was made clear that that is a duty that cannot be delegated. It's not a duty that can be shared. Interested to hear your comments on that and any experiences that you might want to share. I'm heading back over to our live comments here, scrolling back up. There's a few of them there. Hello to Muskan, who is saying hello to me. A couple of comments from Daisy, not quite on the topic that we're talking about, so I may come back to that one, Daisy. One thing that Rochelle had just popped into our chat here, which you might be wondering about, our ebook, the number one thing that dramatically improves apartment living. I didn't touch on this one earlier, though I meant to, and thank you, Rochelle, for the reminder. Those who have been chiming into our what's the best and worst, all right, I'm going to throw it in there. What's the best and worst thing about strata living? Years ago, I turned my mind to this in the context of working with clients, chatting to people on the podcast. At that stage, I'm not sure if we were doing a lot of Facebook, but certainly hearing from owners every day about what was troubling them in their buildings. I started to form some conclusions about what it is that makes for a great building. What is at the foundation? What is the centerpiece, the heartstone, maybe I'm going to say, of a really well functioning building? And I came to the conclusion that of what I was seeing, there was this common feature that great buildings, great communities had. This one thing that they all had in common, this one thing that dramatically improved apartment living from my perspective. And I wrote an ebook about it. Many of you have. It's been around for a while. Many of you have downloaded and read that ebook. You will know what the one thing is that I've identified. Some of you, many of you who are new here to our platform, wouldn't yet have encountered that. So Rochelle has popped that link into our Facebook comments here. I think it's over on YouTube as well. Your free access to my ebook, the number one thing that dramatically improves apartment living. That access is there for you. Click through, access that one, have a read, and you too can find out what the one thing is. Let me know if you agree. Daryl came in and said, hello. Hey, Daryl. Nice to see you. No worries about being late. You can arrive anytime you like. No rules. Shana also saying, I'm finally here. Urgent air conditioner issues and tradesmen here. It's needed in time for my family who are coming from Mudgee. Hopefully that's fixed for you, Shana. We got some hot weather coming. That's for sure, at least where I am. Hey, Wendy. Hey, Olivia. Sally, nice to see you. Lovely to have you joining us from LinkedIn. I read that this decision will assist strata corporations across Australia. Does it apply in Tasmania, where the Design and Builders Practitioners Act doesn't apply? It's a good question, Sally. As I read it, the question before the court was directly arising from the operation of the Design and Building Practitioners Act and what that particular section means. There may be some implications for the home building acts, and I know there are variations of that in each state. I'm not sure of the answer to that question. There will certainly be some more articles coming out, some more smarter and more experienced heads than me in the area of building defects who are commenting on this and writing about this. So my suggestion to you would be, certainly if you've read an article saying that this is going to assist right across Australia and under other relevant state legislation, that may well be the case. Certainly something to be tuning into. And as I read more on it and become more familiar with it, then you may hear more from me on that topic as well. Jeff saying, plan 1, don't admit liability. Plan 2, blame other people. Plan 3, delay litigation aiming to force a settlement. Yeah, it's a good point, Jeff. You might have heard me say this claim was filed by the Owners Corporation in December 2020. 5 days before their 10-year limit expired. It's now 2024. And from what I can read, we're still in this intermediate stoush about whether or not the developer can raise this defense or not. And that's gone all the way to the High Court. I don't know the ins and outs of the legislation. I may be speaking out of turn here, but I don't even think we've got to the stage of assessing the duty of care, the extent of that duty of care, the extent of the responsibility, the liability, the amount that the Owners Corporation could be looking to receive. So yes, lots of costs there, as you pointed out, Jeff, and perhaps a company to be wound up if it is a special purpose vehicle with no assets. Litigation can be very difficult, and it is a brave bunch of owners. You know, it's not this Owners Corporation has been having meetings, hopefully resolving to continue this litigation, resolving to raise money, I'm sure, to fund this litigation, holding their nerve, being guided by their legal advisors, deciding that this is the path to go down. Paid off, seems to have paid off so far, and certainly a decision that is, as I've said, helpful to many and to that building. We are grateful for that. Kristen saying, seems like a bag of goodness. Thanks, Grace Lawyers. Yes, indeed. Rick saying, very interesting case result from the High Court. The DBPA is tricky for strata owners. This is good news. Duty of care for the builder developer. Indeed. Josephine saying, how will it affect strata managers and supervision? Not sure about that one, Josephine. I know we always like to drag our strata managers back in and bash them over the head if we can. Again, just one more time. Not sure how the strata managers are involved. Obviously, each case is going to depend on its particular situation. A strata manager might be very involved in a project, very across the contracts, very across the insurances that are in place, the limitation periods that are in place. I'm often asked this question. I get asked it in the forum a few times in our members forum recently. Amanda, in this situation, is the strata manager at fault? And I kind of say, we kind of need to know a little bit more about that situation. How much did the strata manager know? Did the strata manager ever give advice? Did the strata manager attempt to give legal advice? Was the strata manager aware of the decisions that the committee was making outside of meetings and quite separate from the strata manager? Our strata managers are not omnipotent. They're not mind readers. And even though it might seem like they have been heavily involved in a situation and have a very high level of responsibility, sometimes they're just completely out of the loop. I see that a lot. So that is always, I joke, Josephine, but that is always the question to be asking. What has the strata manager's level of involvement been in this particular situation if we're looking at assessing rights and responsibilities and duties? Daryl saying, my strata hot tip today is for owners to not wait until the media is warning of an impending heat wave before you ask for permission to install a new air conditioner. No, we won't simply ignore the requirements for approval because it's going to be hot next week. Love that, Daryl. I can see the email. I can see the email that you've got this afternoon. Can you just don't worry, don't worry. I've got a guy lined up. He can come next week, only on Wednesday at 2:00. Can you just let me through? It's going to be really hot. I'm going to be unwell. I don't envy you having to deal with that. That is our session for today, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for that broad discussion. Covered quite a few different angles of strata here today. Next Friday, I will be here for our final session for 2025. 2025. I've been so focused on 2025. It's already 2025. Does anybody else do that? Last session for 2024 live here. It is scheduled as an Ask Amanda Now session. Those of you who know how that one works know that it means I choose one question to answer. I put the call out on Thursday, maybe Friday, prompting you to send your questions in, and I choose one question from the long list we always get to answer for you on an Ask Amanda Now. I don't know, maybe I might choose something festive. If you've got a festive question, a holiday question, an external appearance Christmas lights question, an air conditioner question, a hot weather question, I might choose something that is appropriate to the season if you manage to think up one of those for me. But next Friday, should be same time, same channel. I will be here for our Ask Amanda Now and to wish you all well for the end of the year. And then we're going to have a couple of weeks off the podcast after next week. We do have one more podcast episode coming out next week, and then a couple of weeks off until early in the new year when we'll be back fresh, ready to go, on fire for 2025. Looking forward to it. Thank you, everyone, for joining me here. Have a fantastic weekend in or out of strata. Stay cool, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye for now.